Hi, my name is Davis Norman, and I'm one of the founders of Rivendell Sanctuary, a new kind of college. When you think about college, what comes to mind? Over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to challenge your assumptions of what your college experience should look like, and perhaps give you a whole new paradigm for understanding higher education. Here at Rivendell, we're introducing an ancient form of education, and it's more of an apprenticeship education. People used to be apprentices, and we've lost the concept. So we're reintroducing that, where it's going to follow Christ's model of apprenticeship. Not only are students academically and morally ill-prepared to navigate the college social scene, we're also finding that students are philosophically ill-prepared for the classroom. Many students enter college, many Christians enter college not knowing why they believe what they believe. And as a result, they're unable to withstand the secular ideologies that undermine their faith. And as a result, you've probably heard the statistics given by George Barna of saying 75% of all Christians are losing their faith in college. So it's the combination of it all. What we're finding is the conclusion to this is they're finding how 30% of all freshmen are not making it to their sophomore year. And actually less than 50% are graduating. And we feel this is far too high, and this is the vacuum we want to step into. And this is the vacuum we want to fill. So what we're branding at Rivendell, what we're calling InComm education. And this is where learning takes place within community, InComm in community. And to us, we're saying we don't want, failure is not an option. So what we want to do with the students, we want to provide students the support so they can succeed in college. There's no reason 50% should be dropping out. There's no reason 75% should be losing their faith. And so we want to provide students the support so they can succeed and excel in college. Now what the program is offering, we have a biblical philosophy, and we'll unpackage these as we go through the presentation. We also have a holistic program that reflects that philosophy. We have a discipleship model of education, that's the apprenticeship model. We have a self-learning method of education, and we have what we call a sequence modular curriculum. So the Rivendell, it comes in this package. It represents the first 2 years of college. They'll have an Associate of Arts degree and 72 credit hours when they're done with us. So I'm going to start with the biblical philosophy and just kind of build upwards, build the package upwards. We took the Great Commandment to serve as the foundation for a holistic education. And of course that's to love God, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor. So it's out of this philosophy that we built a holistic program that reflects that. So we have a holistic program that has 5 disciplines we do every day with our students. We have 1, a rigorous academic pursuit, which is loving God with your mind. 2, we have spiritual formation, which is loving God, heart, and soul. 3, we have holy and healthy living, which is loving God with our strength. 4, we have community service, which is loving our neighbor. And we added a 5th one that we think is important today, and that's life skills. It's learning to love others through manners, etiquette, and respect. So we have all 5 of these disciplines that we want to impart virtually or practice virtually every day within our students. But for this program to work, for us to have the time to develop the whole person, this is where we're reintroducing that ancient form of education. And it follows Christ's model of apprenticeship. Now, we looked at Christ as the greatest professor who ever lived. But we have to ask the question, did he choose only the best and brightest students Israel had to offer? Was he elitist in that sense? Did he select his students based on their GPAs or based on their college entrance exams? Clearly he wasn't elitist in that sense, but his students, we find, went on to produce some of the greatest results the world's ever seen. So what was it about his model? Why was it so successful? Looking closely at his model, we see that, of course, this apprenticeship model, Christ was one professor with 12 students, and they all stayed together as one unit for 3 years. They learned within a community. This is the InComm, learning within the community we're talking about. In other words, his students never changed classes, classmates, or professors. And the reason being because transformation was central to him, not just imparting information. Transformation was central to him. So this gave Christ the time to transform a life. Because he didn't just have his students 1 hour a day, 3 days a week, and he never saw his students again. It gave him the time. It also gave him the relation with his students, the relational environment with his students, where he could go to a level with his students you can't go today if you only know your students in passing. There's nothing wrong with it, but you're limited. And it also gave Christ the chance to observe his students. In other words, I want to know how you're living, not just what you can regurgitate for a test. That's the ultimate test, how you're living. So he had the chance to observe his students, and they also had the chance to observe him and how he lived. So because we believe in the model and the transformation focus of education, what we do at Rivendell, we take all freshmen and we put them in groups of 30, and those 30 are joined by 4 faculty. And they all stay together as one unit for a year and a half or 18 months. So our students never change classes, classmates, or professors. Now that's the model we've chosen. But for this model to work, this is where we're also reintroducing something else that's been lost in education today, and it's a self-learning method of education. And we built this around Dorothy Sayers' Lost Tools of Learning, where she said that it's fundamental to teach students not simply what to learn, but how to learn and how to think for themselves, to create self-learners. So I build this layer around the question that's often asked is, how can 4 faculty teach all subjects? So I'm going to break this down a little bit and go into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts so you see how this program works. But first of all, how can 4 faculty teach all subjects? First of all, we don't hire the faculty. The faculty do not provide the formal instruction. They're not up front doing the formal teaching. What the faculty are hired to do, they're hired to facilitate learning. And they're there to apprentice them in the fundamentals of learning and how to study and learn for themselves. And they're there to guide them towards truth, but they're not there to do the formal upfront teaching. Second of all, Rivendell is method-driven, we're not lecture-driven. And this is big. This is very practical. This is where we apprentice students in how to learn for themselves, and it's very practical. What we do at the very beginning of Rivendell, we teach students what we call the Rivendell Critical Thinking Method. Now this method is a series of 10 comprehensive questions that will lead to basically teach students how to locate an argument, how to follow the logic of an argument, and then how to evaluate somebody's argument in light of biblical principles. So we take this method and we apply it to 3 levels of instruction. So the faculty don't do the teaching, who's doing the teaching? We have 3 levels and we apply the method to all 3. So first of all, our students are taught by leading historical scholars through classical text. They're taught by leading Christian scholars through live monthly seminars, and they're taught by leading secular scholars through video instruction. So they have all 3 of these for every subject, and again we apply the method to all 3. So for example, if the students are reading C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis is given the lecture that day, not the faculty. He's the expert. If they're reading Plato, Plato's given the lecture that day, not the faculty. And what the students do is they take the method, apply it to his text, and they learn to unpackage his argument. Now what that does is that frees the classroom up now to be a place of discussion, not lecture. They've already had their lecture. Now when they come to class, we put them in small discussion groups that are led by the faculty who teach by asking questions based on what they read. So we're not going to spoon feed them information. We're going to have them wrestle with the ideas themselves. And we're going to challenge them. But the same principle applies. Students are also taught by leading Christian scholars through live monthly seminars. When you go off to college, sometimes it can be hit and miss who your professor is. We said, let's eliminate that and let's bring the best to our students. So we're going to fly them in so our students can sit under a top scholar for every single subject that we teach. They'll have access to a top scholar. But again, we're going to teach them how to take the method and now apply it to a lecture so they can begin to unpackage his argument. The same principle applies to our secular scholars. We're going to introduce them to the secular ideas, and we do this for several reasons. One is these people have done a great service, they've done a lot of research, and they need to be commended for the work that they've done. Second of all, we're here to prepare them to succeed in college, life after us. So they said, let's introduce them to the secular ideas in a safe environment. And by teaching them the method and have the students applying the method to the lectures, they can learn how to evaluate the secular ideas. So when they leave us to go to another college, they've already learned how to evaluate the secular ideas. So we have all 3 of these for every single subject. I've already mentioned this, how Socratic discussion, more discussion groups replace lecture. Another exciting component to the Rivendell program, maybe the most exciting of all, is we have a study abroad component. And this is where we're going to study the fine arts that we'll explain later. We're going to study the fine arts in Italy. So our students will spend 6 weeks in Rome, Florence, and Venice studying the fine arts. We think that's an exciting component today and one that will be very attractive. The last part to our self-learning method, what is the end goal? What are we trying to produce within our students? And ultimately what we're trying to produce is a living epistle. Because if we just stop at knowledge, then we're just like everybody else. Where are we trying to direct them? What are we trying to produce? And we're trying to produce a living epistle within our students. And this is a big part of Rivendell. We have to ask the question, what is an educated person? Is it someone that can just regurgitate information? Or is it somebody that knows how to internalize that information, where it becomes a part of them and it changes their life? So what is an educated person? We're saying at Rivendell there's been a fundamental shift, but what our founding fathers had in mind was not simply to produce an honor student, but what they wanted to produce was a student of honor. Now, what is an educated person? Both biblical and secular, what is important to understand, both seek and affirm knowledge. But that was never meant to be the pinnacle of the epistemological pyramid. Biblically speaking, we were always to strive to reach godly wisdom, which is the moral application of our knowledge. So at Rivendell, we say, what is an educated person? We're saying it's one who attains godly wisdom, and it's one who's learning how to master life. Now, when God was removed from education, of course, godly wisdom went with it. Now, that necessarily changes the answer to your question. An educated person is no longer one who attains godly wisdom. All they've done is they basically attain cognitive knowledge. An educated person is no longer one who's learning how to master life. All we've taught them to do is learn how to master content. And we see it every year at graduation, that who do we esteem with the highest honor at graduation? It's the summa cum laude. It's the one who best mastered content regardless of how they live their life. It doesn't even come into the equation because knowledge is now the pinnacle. I just have to master content. And so at Rivendell, what we're trying to do is move from the secular understanding of knowledge, and let's bring back a biblical understanding of knowledge, and let's start creating students of honor again. Because that is why our nation's in trouble. It's not that we haven't produced enough honor students. It's we haven't produced enough students of honor, CEOs of honor, politicians of honor, accountants of honor. So this is a big part of Rivendell, and it's a big separation point. And so how are we going to go about this? How do we create students of honor? And what we've come to see through experience, becoming a student of honor cannot come through lecture alone. And this is the trap we've fallen into in Western education. We think that I can change a life if I can just stand up and lecture to someone. And this is where we're reintroducing that apprenticeship. Yes, we're going to apprentice students in how to learn, but we also want to apprentice them in how to live. And so what do we mean by that? For an apprenticeship to be a genuine apprenticeship, people used to be apprenticed. And what I mean by that is people were taught a trade, so to speak. But the apprentice, his job every day was to practice that trade over and over and over and over again until they became very proficient in that trade and they could launch out themselves. But what we found, what we discovered, what the Bible has called us to do, God has called us all to be an apprentice of Christ. And we think that we can become apprentice, a true apprentice of Christ, apart from practice. I use this to illustrate, and it's just an illustration. For example, I go back to those 30 students in 4 faculty, staying together. And when a classmate is sick, for example, we're not just going to pray for them. That means we're going to clean their room. We're going to do their laundry. We're going to bring them their food. We're going to read them their assignments. And we start to show that this is what it means to be an apprentice of Christ. You don't want to do it, and I don't want to do it. This is why we are going into the community to care for the poor, the widow, the orphan on a regular basis, because you don't want to do it, and I don't want to do it. For 18 years, our lives have been shaped through media and other ways. Basically, the message has been sent to love yourself and live for this world. So for the next 18 months, we're going to give God the opportunity to rip this out of us and replace it with the principles that govern His kingdom. This is why we're going to do it. So what God was telling us, what good is it if you've produced an honor student, if they never become a student of honor? What have we ultimately done? So at Rivendell, that's what our ultimate goal. We want to start producing students of honor. We got to take our knowledge and we got to learn how to morally apply that knowledge. So that's a big part of Rivendell, and we're intentional about doing that. So that completes the self-learning method. The final package, the final layer to this package, I think we're introducing one of the most revolutionary components in Christian education today. and it's what we're calling the sequence modular curriculum. Now this is where students will study the liberal arts and the sciences, or the gen eds, so to speak. We're going to study them one subject at a time, and we're going to do it in a sequence that follows the flow of the biblical narrative. Now, what we're saying, where the liberal arts are failing today, especially the gen eds, where they're failing today is we failed to tie these subjects into a greater story, a greater whole, a greater narrative. And of course, we're speaking of the biblical narrative. At one time, this story was part of education. Students understood the big picture, and they understood how each subject was to fit into a greater whole. Now what's happened is when the story was removed, what happened is the liberal arts and sciences, they just fragmented into a meaningless hodgepodge of isolated subjects that makes no sense to the student today. And I hear it all the time with students. I said it growing up as well. Say things like, look, I want to be an engineer. Why do I have to study art? Why do I have to study philosophy? Or I want to be an artist. Why do I have to study economics or government? Why are you wasting my time? Just let me get to my major. And so what's happened is students have lost interest, and is one of the primary reasons why the decline in education in America has taken place. We've taken away the reason to learn. So what we want to do, this can easily be remedied, we're saying, by simply injecting God's story back into the liberal arts and sciences. What was once meaningless now becomes meaningful again. Because we say without the creation of the universe, physics doesn't exist. Without the creation of life, biology doesn't exist. Without the creation of man, psychology doesn't exist. Without the family, sociology doesn't exist. And if I don't know who man was before and after the fall, I don't have a proper psychology. These subjects were never meant to be understood independent of the story. And we've neutered these subjects from any meaning. We've taken away the reason for learning. So, what we want to do at Rivendell is we want to reintroduce the biblical narrative to the liberal arts and sciences. So these are our 4 semesters, and it follows that we're going to study one at a time, but we're going to do it in a sequence. So our first semester is our foundation, and there is where we teach students the Rivendell critical thinking method. We're going to teach them how to study and learn for themselves, and then they apply it for the next 18 months. The first disciplines we apply it to is theology and philosophy, the foundation. And there we study who is God, what is knowledge, what is truth. The second semester focuses on the first great events of the biblical narrative, the creation of the universe and the creation of life. And there we want to study what is reality. So our students will study physics, the universe, mathematics being the language of the universe, and biology, life. The third semester focuses on the next great events of the biblical narrative, the creation of man and the family. Our students will study psychology, man, the fine arts being an attribute of man made in God's image, and sociology, the family. And then the fourth and final semester focuses on the creation of a nation, and basically how God took a group of nomads, Israel, wandering through the desert, who at the time they were not a nation, they had no land, they had no government, they had no law, but He took this people group and He molded them into a nation, where they became the greatest nation on earth at one time. And so it's there in that fourth semester we will study God's principles for government, law, and economics. So again, we're going to study one at a time, but it's going to be in the sequence. And what we're arguing is, why study semester 4 without a context of semester 3 first? Why study 3 before 2 and 2 before 1? And when you go off to college, it's just hodgepodge. And so you're taking 5 or 6 different classes, reading 5 or 6 different textbooks, studying for 5 or 6 different exams, writing 5 or 6 different papers. One professor doesn't know what the other's doing, and it fragments knowledge, it disrupts learning. What we're saying at Rivendell, you will study one at a time, but it's going to be in a sequence where each module will build off the preceding module that now shows a unity of knowledge rather than this fragmented form we find today. So that completes our program. What we're telling students, we're saying, look, come here first. Come to Rivendell first for these first 2 years. We're going to provide you the support so you can succeed. 50% should not be dropping out. We're going to teach you how to study and learn for themselves. Okay, 75% should not be losing their faith. We're going to give you the support. We're going to lay a biblical worldview foundation. You'll get your first 2 years of college, 72 credit hours. You'll complete your gen eds, and you'll receive a holistic education. Now after Rivendell, now with this foundation, now you can transfer. You're now ready to transfer to the college of your choice, where you can now get your vocational degree. But now with this foundation, you don't have to become a statistic. You don't have to lose your faith now because you're grounded. And so you can learn your skill and not get lost in the philosophy undergirding that skill from the professors. And it's the combination of the two. It's Rivendell's foundation plus the vocation will enable you to be successful no matter where God's called you in life. So there you have it. At Rivendell, professors and students ask and answer the biggest questions humanity has ever encountered with the best minds Western tradition has ever produced, all in the context of the greatest story ever told.